Cops broke into a black woman's home at 2 a.m. But they weren't ready for what was waiting inside. The road was quiet, covered in fresh snow, the kind that muffles sound and hides footprints. A black SUV with its lights off rolled slowly through the trees, tires crunching against ice. Inside, 6 men sat in silence, faces hidden behind black masks, bodies wrapped in tactical gear. No sirens, no flashing lights, just low radio chatter and heavy breathing. They weren't here to ask questions. They weren't even here to be seen. At the edge of the woods, a cabin stood alone. No neighbors for miles. The kind of place people forget about. The kind of place someone like Naomi Harris chose for a reason. From the outside, it looked quiet, dark windows, no movement. But inside, someone was already awake. Naomi opened her eyes the second the motion sensors lit up on the panel beside her bed. She didn't panic. She didn't move fast. She moved right. Years of training kicked in before her mind even finished waking up. She reached for a small button near her nightstand and pressed it. No alarms, no sirens, just a signal sent out to something deeper, something quiet, something built for this exact moment. Outside, the men split into formation. One whispered into his mic, 2 minutes. Make it look clean. Another one answered, no mistakes. No trail. They moved up the steps. No knock. No warning. Just a battering ram raised and ready. The cold hung in the air, their breath visible like smoke. As the front man gave the signal to breach, none of them saw the 2 faint glows behind the window, 2 eyes, low to the ground, unblinking. Naomi wasn't alone. And they were already too close. This wasn't a raid. It was a mistake. A big one. Naomi didn't waste time. The moment the silent alert confirmed movement outside, she was already out of bed, feet hitting the cold wood floor like she'd done it 100 times before. No panic. No second thoughts. She moved with the kind of focus that doesn't come from training alone, it comes from surviving things most people don't talk about. Her cabin was small but built like a bunker. She crossed the room fast, ducked beside the fireplace, and opened a hidden panel with her fingerprint. Inside was a secured locker, but she didn't grab a weapon. Not yet. Instead, she reached for a small, smooth button tucked into the corner, pressed it once. No sound came from it. But somewhere out there, people she trusted more than family had just been pinged. The Sentinel protocol was active. Behind her, from the shadows of the hallway, 2 shapes moved. Shadow and Bolt, Belgian Malinois dogs trained like soldiers, standing still like statues but ready to strike at a moment's notice. Naomi didn't even have to raise her voice. She gave a quiet whisper, positions, and they moved like they already knew the plan. Bolt took the back hallway. Shadow stayed by the front door, crouched low, completely still. These weren't pets. They were her partners. Naomi threw on a hooded sweatshirt, tucked a small drive into her waistband, and walked to the front room, every step silent. The men outside thought they were creeping up on someone half asleep and helpless. But inside, Naomi stood completely calm. Not scared. Just waiting. These weren't burglars. They were hired. And she could feel it in her bones, they weren't here to arrest her. They were here to erase her. But they didn't know whose door they were standing in front of. Not yet. The front door didn't stand a chance. One hard hit from the battering ram and the old wood cracked loud through the night. But by the time it flew open, Shadow was already in motion. She launched forward like a shadow turned solid, quiet, fast, and unstoppable. The man leading the break-in barely had time to blink before 90 pounds of trained muscle slammed into his chest, knocking him straight off the porch and into the others. The group stumbled, their plan falling apart in the first 5 seconds. One dropped his weapon. Another started shouting orders. But it was too late to fix anything. Inside, Naomi had already vanished into the hallway. She didn't need to see them to know what was happening. Every sound told her what she needed, the weight of boots on the floor, the breath of someone trying not to panic, the clatter of a gun being raised too late. She moved toward the kitchen, eyes sharp, steps measured. Bolt came from the back, catching the man trying to sneak through the rear door. One quick move and the guy was on the floor, his rifle sliding out of reach. Naomi didn't stop. She reached her hidden command panel behind a bookshelf and flipped a switch. Somewhere overhead, a low hum kicked in. Her cabin wasn't just a home, it was a trap built for moments like this. A burst of fog hissed from vents along the ceiling, thickening fast, turning the air into gray soup. It didn't smell like anything. It didn't burn. But if you weren't trained to move in it, you were as good as blind. Her dogs could still see. She could still hear. That was enough. One of the intruders yelled something. Another fired into the haze, hitting nothing but a lamp. The glass popped, and then, silence again. Naomi stayed low behind the counter, fingers moving quickly. She dropped a small signal jammer near the baseboard. A few seconds later, their radios fizzled out. No more communication. No backup. They had walked into a house they thought was unprotected. Instead, they had walked straight into a war they had no idea how to fight. Naomi didn't need to fight all of them, she just needed to break their plan. And from the way they stumbled through the fog, bumping into each other and shouting in circles, she knew it was already working. She stayed low, calm, counting footsteps, listening to how their breathing changed. Every second they spent lost in that room gave her more control. Then she triggered the next layer, an old satellite relay connection that hadn't been touched in years. One switch, one signal, and a quiet message went out to people who didn't need instructions. Just seeing her code word was enough. Across 3 states, former operators, people like her, got the alert. And they moved without hesitation. Back in the cabin, Bolt made his move again, another clean takedown, this time without a sound. The man never saw him coming. Naomi stood up slowly, her silhouette just barely visible in the thick air. She didn't shout. She didn't raise a weapon. She just spoke, her voice steady. "You came here thinking I was alone." The men froze. They couldn't see her, but they heard the truth in her tone. This wasn't fear. This was control. Another intruder tried to push forward. Naomi hit the sonic burst, another hidden defense. A low pulse filled the cabin, quiet enough not to hurt, but strong enough to mess with your balance. 2 of the attackers dropped to one knee, struggling to focus. Shadow moved again, this time pushing both of them toward the hallway, her teeth bared just enough to warn, not to wound. Naomi pulled out her burner phone and typed one phrase, Protocol Echo 9 active. Threat confirmed. That was it. No long messages. No calls. The people on the other end knew what it meant. Her location, her camera feed, her status, it all started pinging across a private network. Help was already on the way. Not sirens. Not uniforms. But people who had fought beside her in places with no names. People who didn't freeze in moments like this. The kind of people who didn't ask questions until after the problem was gone. The fog was starting to thin, but the damage was already done. 2 men were on the ground, groaning. Another had his hands up, pressed against the wall, weapon dropped. Bolt stood between him and the exit, eyes locked, body still. Shadow stayed close to the last attacker, a quiet growl building in her throat as she waited for a command. Naomi stepped out from behind the kitchen island, hood down now, face clear under the overhead light. She didn't look angry. She looked done. Done with running, done with hiding, done with being hunted in her own home. One of the men, the one with the busted wrist, muttered, "We were just doing our job." Naomi turned, slow and controlled, and looked him straight in the eye. "Then you should have asked who signed the check." Her voice didn't rise, but it hit like a hammer. That's when a knock came from what was left of the front door. It was quiet, respectful, but it still made the intruders jump. A man stepped into the light. Older, calm, gray in his beard but sharp in the eyes. Marcus Heller. Former Army Ranger. Now part of Naomi's deep network. He looked at her and asked one thing, "You good?" Naomi gave a small nod. Containment achieved. No fatalities. Marcus stepped inside, scanning the room like he'd already seen the blueprint. "Federal teams inbound," he said. "All footage and comms already syncing to the cloud. No one's wiping this." Naomi let out a breath. Not relief, just a reset. Her muscles loosened, but her mind stayed alert. This wasn't over. These men weren't just here for her. They were a message from someone who wanted her gone. Someone with reach. She looked back at the man on the floor, the one still clutching his wrist. "You've got one chance," she said. "Talk now, or spend the next 20 years while your boss forgets your name." He hesitated, looked at the blinking red camera light, and nodded. That was all Naomi needed. It was time to trace the chain back to the hand that sent them. Marcus didn't waste time. He pulled out a tablet from his bag and started digging into the comms the intruders had been using. "One of them didn't wipe his gear," he said, eyes scanning fast. Naomi stepped closer. "Which one?" He pointed to the man still holding his wrist on the floor. "Mr. Regret over there." Naomi crouched beside him, not to threaten, but to give him a choice. "You want to rot in a cell while your boss keeps getting paid? Or you want to walk out with your future still yours?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at the red recording light again, like he was wondering if anyone would believe him. Naomi softened just a little, enough to make the next part land. "You were used," she told him. "They knew exactly who I was. And they sent you in here like I wouldn't make it out. That's not a mission. That's cleanup." The man gave a nod, barely, but it was enough. Marcus handed him the tablet. "Start talking." And he did. Not everything, not names, but enough. Payment logs, ghost accounts, encrypted job details. One company name came up more than once, McBride Strategic Holdings. Naomi's jaw tightened. She knew that name. Calder McBride, rich, clean image, public charities, handshakes with politicians. But behind the scenes, he'd been quietly buying up land all across Colorado. Not just any land, land owned by veterans, retirees, families without big legal teams. People like Naomi. And her cabin? It sat right in the way of a major development project. If she didn't sell, the whole deal fell apart. If she vanished, the land would get tied up in county hands, easier to grab. Naomi stood and walked across the room, heart steady, thoughts racing. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was a pattern. A setup. She turned back to Marcus. "We go public," she said. "Not just the footage from tonight. All of it. We show who's behind this and why." Marcus looked at her carefully. "You sure? That's a big swing. You'll be out front." Naomi didn't flinch. "Then it's time they saw me coming." Naomi didn't wait. She plugged her encrypted drive into the terminal near her desk and started uploading everything, the cabin footage, audio clips, GPS logs, and the payment trail tied to McBride's company. Not just tonight's break-in, but every piece of evidence she'd gathered over the years. She drafted a short, clear message with no dramatic words, just the truth, backed by proof. The files were set to upload to 3 different cloud servers. If she didn't check in every 6 hours, the packet would automatically be sent to journalists, legal teams, and veteran support groups. A fail-safe. One she'd built back in the field, and never thought she'd need again. By the time the sun rose, her cabin looked more like a command post than a home. The men who had broken in were zip-tied and waiting for federal agents to pick them up. Outside, the veterans who had answered her call worked quietly, sharing encrypted notes, securing the area, running forensics. These weren't people who talked a lot. They just handled things. Naomi stood at her kitchen counter, sipping from a dented metal mug, her eyes fixed but clear. She wasn't tired. She was ready. An agent from Homeland Security named Dorsey arrived just before noon. No flashy entrance. No warnings. Just a folder, and one sentence: "We've been watching McBride for months." What happened here? This might be the break we needed. Naomi flipped through the folder. The deeper she read, the more pieces lined up. McBride wasn't just buying land, he was watching veterans, targeting them, using contractors like the ones she had just taken down. They weren't here to catch her. They were here to erase her. The agent offered her protection, a sealed testimony, a chance to disappear until the case could go to court. Naomi shook her head. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I want them to know I'm still standing." And just like that, the next phase of her plan began, not to survive, but to strike back. Not for revenge, but so no one else would have to go through what she just did. The next 48 hours moved like clockwork. Naomi made sure of it. She didn't wait for headlines or promises, she pushed the truth out herself. The footage from her cabin started spreading fast, but not through big media outlets. She sent it to smaller platforms first, veteran-run websites, independent journalists, people she knew wouldn't edit it down or twist the story. It wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. It was raw. Real. People saw it for what it was, a woman fighting back against something much bigger than a break-in. By that evening, her name was trending online. Not because she wanted attention, but because the story hit a nerve. Veterans from across the country started speaking up, sharing similar stories of pressure, silence, land being pushed out from under them. Lawyers reached out. A few state officials started asking questions. But Naomi kept her focus. She wasn't looking for praise. She wanted action. She met with a lawyer named Alicia Penn, a former Marine who'd been building a case against developers like McBride for years. When Alicia saw the footage and documents Naomi had collected, she didn't hesitate. "You're not alone," she said. "McBride's been doing this in at least 5 counties. But with your evidence, we've got a real shot." Naomi didn't smile. She just nodded. She knew what it meant to be the face of something. It wasn't about being brave, it was about being ready when no one else was. Meanwhile, the people who had once stayed silent started showing up. A retired teacher. A single mom. A widow who'd lost her home after a zoning error. Naomi didn't just listen, she connected the dots. She kept the files, the names, the stories. Piece by piece, the pattern became too clear to ignore. This wasn't just about her cabin anymore. It was about every person they thought they could push into a corner and silence. And now, that silence was gone. Naomi had made sure of it.